So this morning, we're going to talk a little bit about financial literacy, obviously, and how some of us feel like budget is a scary word. Financial literacy is more important than ever in today's world. Managing your money, that's a personal skill, and it benefits you throughout your life. It's not it's not a skill that everyone has though, right? With money coming in and going out, fees attached to things, bills, it really can be overwhelming. So, what you need to think about what the stakes are, they're very high. And this would be the skill that should get taught in high school, right? Or even before. But I don't think that's happening in most cases. Managing your own money requires a fundamental understanding of personal credit and a willingness to embrace personal responsibility. I really, I really love that last line. So a willingness to embrace personal responsibility. To me, that is key to all of this. And no matter where you are on your financial journey or adventure, as I would like to think of it, it is, you can take responsibility wherever you are right now. To be financially literate means having the ability to not let money or the lack of it in some cases get in your way of happiness. And that I find is very true. So today our class will last about an hour. Um, so let's start on this adventure. I do like the phrase from Dave Ramsey in the bottom. A budget is telling your money where to go instead of wondering where it went. And for me personally, that resonates. So on our journey today, we are going to teach you all kinds of things. We are going to have identify your ability to spend your spending habits. We're going to talk about wants versus needs. We're going to talk about 3 different common budgets. Honestly, as you guys know, there are so many budgets out there. These are just 3 vastly different budgets that we chose to talk about today. But if none of these fit who you are and your life, then go try some more and go out to Google. Google has so many budgets. It's kind of overwhelming. So today we're going to specifically talk about 3 that we've chosen to talk about today. We're going to list some benefits of creating and using a budget. We're going to classify expenses. We're going to make sure that our spending habits match what our money is. So we're going to categorize purchases, and we all know what that means, but it gets a little different later on. So we're going to adopt a spending plan, and sometimes that's easier to say that instead of a budget. So that's what we're going to do before the class is over. Introduction is what we've done. This is kind of our roadmap for today. I think that we're going to touch on all of these. Of course, I am not the end all and be all of budgeting. So I'm sure you'll have questions at the end. And there was a room moderator in the class. You can ask them, or you can talk with your case managers to get more information. Or again, like I said a minute ago, Google. Google is our friend, right? Sometimes. So first thing we're going to do this morning is we're going to help you kind of take an introspective look on your thoughts and your feelings when you hear the word budget. So I'm going to give you a second if you want to turn one of the papers over and jot some of those ideas down. That would be great. I'm actually going to give you about 2 minutes, and hopefully you'll discover some things. So write some words down, and I'll be right back with you. All right, so how did that go? Hopefully, you had some positive thoughts in there when you thought of the word budgeting. But for me personally, I definitely had some negative thoughts first. Yeah, it's not really good to admit out loud. But I was definitely had the like it's a waste of time, kind of made me want to cry a little bit, um, and the stress of it. But then, as I got comfortable with that uncomfortable feeling, which you have to do, I realized that there's a lot more positive things, and I'm like, it's realistic. It will definitely help me with my future goals, and hopefully, money left over at the end would be really good. So, I think this word art kind of speaks well for all of us. So did any of you guys have some of those word art? The good part about technology is that I can see you in your classrooms. I am teaching to 8 different counties this morning. So if you have any questions, or if you, I can see when you're kind of done, it's all good. So thank you very much for that. We're going to go on to a little bit of a discussion now about basically a goal without a plan is just a wish. So, and that took me a little while to become friends with, if you want to say, because it was hard for me to relate the goal, just a wish. So, what is the difference? For me, you have to write that down. For me, you have to have concrete proof. So, what do you think about your feelings about the money and the budgeting, and how does that attach to your goals? And how does budgeting influence your decision making? So, in regards to budgeting, the focus definitely needs to be put on not on the budget itself, but on that goal or that outcome of having the spending plan that will allow you to achieve. For instance, why would you do all this work if it's not going to be any good for you, right? So let's just say I want to go to Ireland. If you have a goal, I have a goal personally of going to Ireland, and I'm definitely going to need to adjust my budget so that I'll be able to save the money for my vacation. I cannot just go, oh, I want to go to Ireland, and if I don't have it down and I'm not taking control of my money, I'm never going to get there. So that's why for me it's easier, and for most people it is easier to focus on the needs that each remain on my trip, right? Instead of that I'm having to budget right now. So it does increase motivation. It does provide a more tangible outcome that it comes from following my spending plan, which is what I choose to call my budget, because that word does offend me a little bit. That's okay. So this, I like to think of budgeting as a roadmap, right? This is we're gonna be here, and we're gonna eventually go over there to that pile of money, which sounds great. So to understand what you spend and where you spend definitely is the beginning of developing your spending plan. It is the hardest part, and the good news is once you start that out, you can really attach any house to your foundation of your spending plan once you get that hard work done. So developing a spending plan, it always helps you. It helps you create realistic categories to track your current spending, identify your poor spending habits. You probably already know that, your poor spending habits. All right, I know my poor spending habits. So, but it's really good and shocking sometimes when you see them down on paper. So definitely, one of the tips that we've been given and that we're passing on to you is to rename it. You can rename your budget anything you want. Spending plan, financial plan, whatever fits with you and makes you feel less sad for any lack of a better term. So again, this is a personal adventure for you, and you get to name it whatever you'd like to name it. So the first part of that adventure is going to be discovering what kind of spender you are. And there are basically, excuse me, 2 kinds of spending. And some of these will kind of tell you what's going on. So habitual spending, you're going to buy those same things daily, weekly, monthly. You know if you do that. Do you go out to breakfast at the same place? And those are the habits that are really, really difficult to break. So if you're used to picking up a beverage on the way to work with a little snack, and that's part of your habits, it's going to be a little bit harder to do this. So impulsive spending, you absolutely purchase unneeded items without thinking ahead, without even thinking about where your budgets are. You're attracted by the advertisement and sales. So personally, you're basically the advertiser's dream person. consumer, the end caps, if you know what I'm talking about. So do absolutely, if you're impulsively spending at that moment, it feels really good. It's the later that it gets a little bit, it's the remorse spending at that point. So that helps you decide if that was an impulsive spending situation. So one of the best rules that I have heard and I do follow is it's best to try that 24-hour rule. So just kind of stop and decide, I'm going to wait, unless it's an emergency. I'm going to wait to see if I feel the same about it tomorrow. That way, I don't regret it as much and I feel like I have more control. So now we're going to talk a little bit about your last 5 purchases. And the paper that the moderators gave you has last 5 purchase activity, and that's the top of the page. The bottom of the page, we're not going to really look at. That's for you to do at your house or anywhere you'd like to do that. It's about the big purchases, and we thought that would be something that maybe you would enjoy doing on your own. But today in class, we are going to do um, that last purchase activities. So you need to think about and reflect on your last 5 purchases, determine your spending habits by completing the chart. So go ahead. I'm going to give you about 5 to 10 minutes. Again, good luck and be honest, because that's the only way to get where you are. So I'll be back in about 5 minutes. All right. How'd that go? First time that I tried to do this activity, I was like, this is going to be super easy. I got this. It was a little harder than I thought because you go and you buy gas and you're like, I'm just going to run in and get this other thing. And, it was hard for me to remember my last 5 purchases, harder than I thought it would be. I thought that was going to be super easy. It's kind of a fun activity to do. So what were your thoughts on that activity? Did you notice, were they habitual or impulsive spending? Was it a want or a need? We're going to talk more about that. What changes, if any, would you make with these purchases? And how did these purchases affect your budget? So again, like I said earlier, this is going to be a personal adventure. So it will determine how it's going for you. You may already know that those budgets were those items that you did on that activity. You may be fully aware that they're in your budget already. So this was fun. Actually, this is activity I took home with me, and I had my family take, and that was pretty eye-opening. We got to have a conversation about that. So that is another option for that. First thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about developing a spending plan. And there are basically 3 different step processes in it. So you have to track. And really that is really the hardest part. So basically you have to keep record of what you spend. And now that you've determined what kind of spender you are, it becomes the most time-consuming part on budgeting, and usually what scares people off. So it does take time to track your financing. This is the first and one of the most important steps. You must know how much is coming in and going out. So in order to make a clear picture of your finances. So my idea would be just grab a cup of coffee or your drink of choice and go sit and spend some time to go through your records and figure out what's happening with your tracking of the finances. It is very important. So then when you're done with that, I would take a little break, give yourself some grace, and then you're going to look at reviewing that. So you're going to analyze the information that you collect, and you're going to make decisions based on that information. So you've done all that, right? And you are making decisions. What are you going to do now? Are you just going to make decisions and that's it? No, you're going to take action. So sometimes for people, once they've done the tracking and the reviewing, they give themselves a little while then to take the action because you kind of sit on it and feel about it and think about it. So, but if you don't take action, you're not going to get anywhere. But again, I would like to say that the tracking and the reviewing is really the foundation for any budget you put on top of it. So this work, no matter what, is going to be essential, and it's going to help you with any spending plan that you decide to have. So, so tracking your income and your expenses, all your sources of income, all of them. So if you have a side job, that does count as income, unless you've already decided in your budgeting that it's not going to count. But it would be easier and better for the end product if you put all of your sources of income in on this. And then, of course, you record your daily purchases. You determine what categories. And again, that is personal. What do you consider what? And then you use the data to create a budget. So this sounds very easy and very logical, right? When you're doing your paperwork, when we talk about all your sources of income and then gather all your paperwork also, you need to make sure that you get your paycheck stubs, your W-2s, your bills, your bank statements, your credit or loan statements, and then your receipts. So one of the habits that I've come into is I keep my receipts. And that way I can be like, oh, how much was that? Sometimes it's easier to pretend it wasn't quite as much as the receipt said. So if it's like $9.97, I go, it's only $9. So, but the truth is, and that's where the adventure comes in. And the truth is that, it was actually $10. So it's, again, how you look at your truth. So once you've gathered all your paperwork and you record your daily purchases, you begin to sort those into spending categories. Not all expenses are created equal. So the sorting into the different categories, it's surprisingly important. The purpose of this sorting is to begin to determine what expenses are fixed and what are variable. And I'm sure you've heard those words before. The information gathered from your income and your expenses will ultimately allow you to begin laying that foundation for your budget or spending plan. the best way to make a spending plan is to take advantage of your year's worth of your monthly expenses. If your records only go back a couple months, that's good. Start where you are, right? You're okay. Don't disregard making a budget because that's all you have. Start right where you are. So some of the questions that you need to ask yourself is, what do you think? What do you think would be considered a fixed expense and variable expense? Because now that you're trying to categorize things, you need to kind of figure that out, right? And again, it is a journey, a personal journey. So we're going to talk a little bit about that and help you get some ideas. Up front, it seems pretty easy, right? So fixed expenses, they don't change from month to month. Rent, mortgage, right? And those variable expenses that occurs on a regular basis. So your budget is comprised of both the fixed and the variable expenses. It is so much easier to budget for fixed expenses than variable expenses or that discretionary expense. The major lesson here is that in spite of the name fixed, the expenses they're not necessarily set in stone. You could devote a couple hours in cutting those down. For instance, visiting your cell phone provider, seeing if you can get less, talking to your cable, looking at your cable situation and deciding that, do I need all these channels? Do I even watch all those channels? Basically, in other words, lowering your fixed monthly bills, it won't make you feel like you're being frugal, because I don't think of those, right? Most people do not think of that as money that they don't think about it going to their monthly fixed costs. You're going to feel that pinch much more when you take a day-to-day decision, like, should I eat at that restaurant? Should I go to that morning place that I go to that serves me great coffee and snacks? So that's where it's going to come in for your variable. Variable expenses represent those daily spending decisions, like I just said, eating or buying clothes, drinking expensive coffee, going to expensive movies. There are other options. If you feel like the coffee and the movies are important to you, then you can find a cheaper option. You can go have cheaper coffee, which is just as good. I personally am a drinker, so you guys are coffee drinkers. Maybe you may think it's not as good, but you can go to the cheap movies. Most families, for example, they spend variable amounts of money on their groceries each month. Everybody's different. Most people spend variable amounts each month on putting gasoline in their cars and paying for things like car repairs or maintenance. Excuse me. Saving on variable expenses is very important. So variable costs are usually the first expenses that we try to cut, right? It's like a spending diet, basically. Unfortunately, the variable costs are also some of the toughest expenses to cut back on because it requires that daily commitment to the frugal decision making. You have to decide, am I going to go to that machine today? Am I going to do this thing that I always do? And it does. It is a little more hurtful on that day-to-day moment when you have to make that decision. So trimming a fixed cost, like I said earlier, your cell phone plan, your insurance, like your cable package, it does require making one decision and then you save money every month. So it is, again, a little easier. Trimming those variable costs that requires actively making multiple decisions every day about whether or not I'm going to buy that certain item. Doesn't mean you have to give up that item, right? If I'm going to go get my soda out of a machine, maybe I should go get that soda from the store and have it at my desk. So you can still potentially have what you would like and save money. It just does take the thinking ahead. And we all know that. That's common sense information. If you need to start cutting back on costs, you definitely want to look both at your fixed and your variable expenses. Devoting a Saturday afternoon to review all of your subscriptions, your insurance plans, or your recurring bills may help you trim hundreds of dollars from your fixed monthly budget. So I'm going to just give you some visuals on the fixed and variables. You already have those in your mind. I'm very visual. So this is kind of what we came up with as a variables and fixed. But again, if you don't agree with that, that's perfectly fine. So, and some of these fixed items, you can go and get it changed. So let's talk about, we're going to jump right into the hard stuff, needs versus wants. So really, sometimes I personally think, what is the difference? For me, it gets a little confusing. I want this, so it becomes what I feel like to be a need. But if we get down to the bottom line here, it shows on this graphic, the needs, it may result in onset of disease or even death. Well, that's a little crisp, right? I was like, what? That's harsh. It and a want may result in disappointment. So for me personally, I actually go right to the hard line. Immediately, I'm like, is this going to cause disease or death? Do I need this? If not having this, is this going to cause me personally disease or death? No, probably not. It's going to result in disappointment. And sometimes if we're that feeling sometimes feels like it's going to be horrible, but you probably will live through it. I can tell you I've lived through it because I do ask that hard question at the end, that will this result in disease or even death? In fact, my family's getting a little cranky about me asking that question, but I'm okay with that. So basically, we're going to talk about, again, your personal journey and how you're going to decide what is a needs versus a want. And so some of the categories, of course, are kind of, you have the same, like you need food, right? But there is a needs and a want situation in that food. So for instance, food can be, all kinds of food. Some of my friends think that ice cream is a want. No, for me, it's not. Ice cream is a need. I may die or have disease or even death if I don't have ice cream, but that's my personal decision. Then I absolutely need to have protein and vitamins and minerals, but how you get them is up to you. So I choose that ice cream is a need. So again, it is personal. So there you go. I told you already I was a visual, so we're just going to go through these items pretty quickly, and it gives you an idea of, what you consider a need and a want. So, and this is a conversation that I'm having with my friends, and it's weird because once you start talking about it and you get thrilled with how you're saving money and what you're doing, it does tend to become a conversation point. At my house, my mother-in-law thinks that like having a phone is absolutely a want. That's what she thinks. We don't need a phone. And I disagree with her, which is okay. I think that the question is do you want or need an iPhone, an Apple phone, right? That's kind of where it is. I feel like in the world today, having a phone, not having a phone is a disadvantage for you. But she doesn't think that. So again, it's all your own perspective. So, and this to me, if I add those two graphics right there about the cable and the big screen TV, other people have different opinions on whether that's a want or need. So that is a personal decision you and your people that live with you get to make. Eating out, and sometimes in today's world, we're all very busy, right? So we're going from from work to an activity, and sometimes we do not absolutely have time to go home, make that dinner, and then get the people where they need to be. So you may have to eat out. So the decision becomes, where can we eat out? How can we save money? What can we do? And again, this laundry situation, everyone has to have laundry. So that's definitely a need. But do I need to have that laundry, that machine at my house that actually, folds and steams my laundry? So that's kind of what I'm talking about. So then we're going to go back to the taking action part. So step 3, we're going to pick a plan. And I talked with you earlier that we're going to go over 3 different plans. And the plans today, the first one is envelope system, and then the zero based budget, and then the 50-30-20. So these are the 3 that we want to show you. They're pretty vastly different ideas and concepts, and then the way you implement them in your life are different. But again, every one of these started with that foundation of the first 2 steps, getting yourself ready. So the envelope budget system may seem complicated at first. Well, for me, it sounds super simple, but when you get going, it's a little complicated, but it does encourage discipline and planning in your personal finances. Using the envelope budgeting system, you withdraw cash from your bank account based on the budget you've set for that month. So you've done that first 2 steps, you know how much money you need, and you're going to withdraw it, right? You're going to have envelopes, of course, and you're going to put those envelopes the money in the envelopes, and that's how you're going to designate where your money goes to. So you'll have to decide what names are going to be put on those envelopes and where that money is going to go. So we've already done step one, right? We've already done step two. I love that. Yay, team. So creating your expenses, your categories, that is a little more complicated because you're going to see that all the time on this. You're going to have to really decide. And if you pick the wrong category name, you'll figure that out. It'll be evident soon. So knowing that you only have a specific amount of money to spend should help you curb your impulse buying. It will be a challenge, of course, but it will actually help you in the long run. You have to get used to spending like this. I'm sure that we've all gone into the store and without our cards, for instance, we're just going to run in. So I personally take more time and actually add things up and figure out, because I know I don't have a card to save me if I decide to impulse buy. So this is basically that idea. So some of you may already have been practicing this. So you may be okay with this. This is also this envelope system. I started this with my family when they were young, and my children had envelopes, and they all got involved. They figured out, they named the categories, they drew on the envelopes, they did everything like that. And so that teaches them how to be responsible with their money, and that's a lifelong skill. So I was pretty pleased with my children when they were really getting into that. So, well, I'm sorry, I went ahead too quickly. So basically, the budgeting system, this envelope budgeting system, it is strict. It really means that you should not transfer your funds from one envelope to another, right? So if you finish your money before the end of the month, that means you're done with that. So if your fun envelope is empty, then you need to figure out how to have fun without spending money. And I really think we all should do that anyway. It just seems to be easier to go do something that's already set up and planned. But for me, it was actually part of the adventure of the envelope system. So once we figured out it wasn't as fun to not have money at the end, we incorporated more free items. When my children could see the money going someplace else, that was so much better for them. And then I got to say, hey, there's no money here, so we're not doing this. Let's find another thing. So it helps them with their planning. And for me as an adult, it actually still helps me. So some of the reflection questions I want you to think about is what do you think are some of the advantages of this system? So to me, I've already said that, it's visually apparent. Your funds are right there. Having that virtual queue of your cash that you have left, it reminds you on a weekly or monthly basis how much your spending habits are, and you have to be accountable for that. I think the secondary advantage of it is you do have an emergency fund. I know I sound like I'm contrary because a minute ago I said to you, don't take money from one envelope and put in another one. But sometimes, life happens. So you might need to pay for something immediately, or normally you wouldn't have cash for on hand, but you have that. So if you're willing to take responsibility for that, that's good, and it will help you. Although money in the envelopes is really not meant to be shared, it does come in handy if you need cash right this minute, and then you can adjust yourself. So some of the advantages are no interest rates. So you have to worry about paying those high interest rates, right? And also, you do improve your planning skills. So using this envelope budget system, it definitely makes you think about what you're going to buy because you only have that fixed amount. So you have to think ahead. Sometimes when you have that little plastic card in your hand, it's easy to not think. And then when the bill comes, you can have a moment or two. You absolutely have a moment or two. So, all right, so here's another one. What do you think are some of the disadvantages of this? So for me, or some of the people say that drawing out large sums of money is a disadvantage. So basically, they don't feel safe with that money in their house or on hand, or they find it inconvenient to go to ATM. That's true, it could be, but it's definitely worth it. So the second disadvantage is no credit card benefits, and some of us use those benefits for getting items or taking flights, which somehow in our mind we think, well, if we spend more, we'll get to go on vacation this year. But that's not necessarily true. So with this budgeting system, you don't get to use your steps or your credit card benefits. I have a friend who uses her card. is a Disney card, and she goes on vacation, she buys everything on her card. But that's how she budgets, right? So she's made a decision that's how for her life, that's how she's going to do. So, but personally, I don't see that as a huge disadvantage, but that would be you making up your own decision in that. Again, if you don't have extra money at the end, don't be discouraged. Look at your record, see what went wrong, and adjust. So for me, I put the receipts in the envelopes. I wrote on them. I made that kind of where my bookkeeping was, and that was so much easier for me that way. So at the end, you may have extra money. That's the goal, right? But if you have extra money left over at the end of the month, do you have a debt that needs to be paid off? It's easy sometimes to think, oh, I'm going to go out and do something special for my fine self because I have extra money. When in reality, the whole point of this budgeting situation is learning to pay down our debts and become more free with our money. So again, it's easier to think you want to spend that extra money, but there you go. So that is the envelope system. Super easy. And again, there's more information on that on Google. So our second system that I want to talk about is the zero-based budget. That zero-based budget is very straightforward. It's a budget which works on the premise of assigning each dollar of income a task, every dollar. So at the end of the month, there shouldn't be any money left over on that budget, which the envelope system, you're excited if there was money left over. This one, because of the way you're adjusting your money, you should not have any left over. This doesn't mean spend it all, of course, like we just talked about. It means assigning each dollar a job. For example, excess funds can go towards savings or paying down debt or investing. So how does that work for us? How does it work? So you make a list of your monthly incomes. What? You've already done that. Yay. Monthly expenses, done that. See, this is good. This makes me feel like we're already ahead. Non-monthly expenses, we all have those, right? The trash that comes, you have to pay every 3 months, or even your insurance. Yeah, so write that down, and then your savings and debt goals, and then income minus expenses. All just everything self-explanatory of what we had just talked about. So this is a visual of that zero-based budget example. I would like to go on record to say that this person apparently started out with a $5,860 budget. Not realistic in my world. So you could switch that up. This is a visual example, but it doesn't touch base with me because that's not even remotely close to most people's world. So this gives you an idea visually on basically at the end, there's no money remaining because I gave them all jobs. So for some people, that really does work for them. It's a way to think about it. So basically, one word of advice is this does take practice. So to get your budget to go down to zero, it will take practice. So give yourself some grace. Expect it to take a couple months to fine tune for sure. But once you get it running smoothly, you'll be happy knowing where your money is going every month. And you do know exactly where it's going with this. And it is apparent. So, all right, so that's our second budget. This next one we're going to talk about is the 50-30-20. So this Harvard bankruptcy expert, Elizabeth Warren. She is a senator from Massachusetts. She was listed on one of the 100 most influential people of the world. She actually made this. She wrote a book, All Your Worth, the Ultimate Lifetime Money Plan. And that's the 50-30-20 rule. So how does it work? And how they recommend you organizing your budget. Here we go. So visually, for me first, of course, they're going to want you in step one. Step one is what? Calculating your after-tax income, figuring out how much you have. And then step two, you got to limit your needs to 50% of your tax income. So at first I think, oh, I got a lot. That's 50%. That's good. So that may be a little bit, it may help you realize if your mortgage or your rent payments are too high, maybe you need to readjust that and say, wow, I didn't know where I was in this. And that's what's hurting me so hard. So in step three, they want you to limit your wants to 30%. Really? That was pretty exciting for me. So like it says here on this visual, shopping, dining out, hobbies. That's what I'm talking about, 30% of my money. Not really. So we talked about that your definition of need and wants, it doesn't really include extravagances. So that's not go have fun and spend all your money. So although it feels like that, which is kind of good at first, the fourth step is very interesting. The spend 20% on savings and debt reduction. If you're not doing that, this is maybe even a good framework to look at. How is my money being used in my house? Am I saving as much as I need to? What can I do to make that change? So this, to me, this 50-30-20 is kind of an overlay, something you could kind of put on your budget to help you keep within the guidelines of kind of safe budgeting practices. So you should spend at least 20% of your after-tax income repaying debts and saving money, and your emergency fund or your retirement accounts. I will tell you that retirement comes quicker than you think it's going to, even though it seems like it takes forever. So you never have enough money in that situation. So that's the 50-30-20. And again, what I like about that is it gives me a framework that I apply over all the other budgeting, just to see if I'm kind of okay, or if I'm, out of line a little bit with what my budget's supposed to look like. So let's ask ourselves some following questions before you buy. So in the very beginning, we talked about you have to keep track of everything. And that most important step before that is to think, right? You stop, sit down, think, observe, and plan. That's something I always do. So some of the questions: does your spending align with your goals? Are you going to be able to reach your goals with this current spending habit that you do have? Do you need it? Oh, we're going to go back to that, right? Is it going to cause death or disease? Probably not. It may, though. So don't, it's just a question you need to ask yourself. So how will buying whatever I'm going to buy right now make my life easier or better? Sometimes we think we can't live without things, and then we bring it home. We don't really have a place for it, or, it doesn't really make it easier. So that, to me, that's a really good question. Is it going to make it better? Is my life going to be better if I have more things? So that's part of what you need to ask when you go. This one I really love. Can I find this someplace else for cheaper? Because of the electronic world we live in, which is wonderful and amazing, we all know there's a company that can deliver overnight or in the next 2 hours, and you can find online everything that you're purchasing in the store. So for me, part of the adventure is now, hey, I check. Is this something I really want? Is it, under a certain price? I don't check, but over that, I'm like, I'm going to check it. Let's see. So I go and check, and that makes me feel good to know, hey, I can buy it now because this is actually a sale, and I am following through with my goals. So do I want that item more than I want my goal? And going back on me, do I want that item more than I want my vacation to Ireland? Well, the answer to that really is always going to be no. But then I have to readjust because I do have to spend money sometime. I can't spend it all going to Ireland. So asking this question for myself is really good. It works for me very much. So now we're going to talk about the other papers that we gave you. You've probably already been looking at them because they're really great. There are some apps involved, the top personal finance apps, right? So in these modern times, there is an app for everything. It has never been easier to track your money and stay on budget. It's a snap to automate your payments. It's easy to set and track your financial goals. You should basically never miss a bill payment. All that sounds easy, but you still have to go back and do the first work, right? You have to gather your stuff. You have to figure out how much you're spending, all of that. And it does line in with some of these apps. So our best choices are what you're looking at here, the financial apps, the finance apps. These are what we found. There's thousands of apps out there, and they're improving them, and they're coming and going with apps. So we would like to suggest, though, that personal finance apps, that you're careful. It is cool to use apps, and we all like to play on our phones. So maybe if that's what you like to do, and you're somewhere and you could get your budgeting in while you're doing something else, multitasking, that for me is great. So if you can do it, they're definitely a more efficient, convenient, and rapid apps. They're going to get better. So as you find one, don't give up. If you think that's where you want to do your budgeting on your phone. Security is definitely a priority, particularly with the uneasiness over breaches in the cyber world. But I think that if you keep a lookout, people will let you know what's going on, or your app may disappear. It is difficult to make that, for us to make like the recommendation for the one, excuse me, because every situation is different. One thing for certain, though, I do want to remind you is that the best part of this would be that you don't want it to cost you anything. Excuse me. The world is changed. It has changed. It's going to continue to change. Personal finance apps are no longer a rarity. New ones come out, I'm sure, daily. I don't check that. So it is the part of mainstream living now, and you may want to try that. The next thing we're going to talk about is just budgeting apps in general. So there's one simple rule for the Budgeting Act, and I had on it a minute ago, is they want you, of course, budgeting, there's one simple rule: spend less than you earn, right? This statistic shocks me. Unfortunately, 55% of American consumers say they either spend more than they make or all of the money they earn. And that was a survey released in 2018. So 55% of American consumers spend more or spend more money than they make or all of the money that they make. So again, I would like you to just kind of self-evaluate. And if you're in that, you're making the right steps forward, give yourself some grace and realize that this is transition. It's a lot easier said than done to do that budget. If you get help from a budget app, it's great. Whatever you need to help you start down this road, it is a lifetime journey. There are so many budget apps, all of which are better than just trying to do math in your head, right? So that's an option. Remember that the best app is the one that helps you follow one simple rule to spend less than you earn. So also, these are kind of our rules when we looked at this and discussed it as a group. One rule is it should be simple. There's no need to overcomplicate things. You should be able to open a budget app and immediately begin creating that monthly budget. You've already done the paperwork, so you kind of know what to put in there. With maybe just a few easy to follow instructions. But if your budgeting app has a huge tutorial with it, me personally, I wouldn't like that. Some people like to work that way. They like to have that, the harder stuff. So also, it should be cheap. The whole world of budgeting apps, it's here to help you save money. So if you're actually paying for a budgeting app, it's contrary to what you're trying to do. Once you use the free version, we all know, then they ask us if you want to upgrade to a better version. That's an idea once you've used the free version, right? So once you find out that you love it, and then you may be willing to just figure out in your budget where you can afford then to buy that app, their increased information. So something simple and cheap that will track how much money that you spend and how much money you earn. That's it. There are so many apps, and honestly, we didn't list all of the apps, obviously. But the most important thing you can do is be consistent and have some discipline. And that's pretty much for everything in our world, right? So if you're not consistent and you're not disciplined with it, nothing's going to work. But again, if you fall off that, start again later. It's always a new Monday. You can start again. So why is budgeting and financial planning important? Money management tool, right? I just gave you a bunch of tools. You know where your money is. You feel that empowerment with it. You know how much money you have and where it's going. You do feel you have control over your finances. We may not have control all the time with how much money we have. We're trying to get, what comes in. We all want more. We may not have control exactly, but we do have control of what we do with what we have. So it's important. It does help you with organizing and de-stressing. To me, this of course is after you've had the stressful part of doing the foundation. So you are more organized, you are de-stressing once that work is done. But like anything worthwhile, it does take a little bit of work to start it off. And it is a communication tool. So if someone says, hey, I want to do this, you can say, you know, my budget is not allowing me to do that. And you're not just giving an emotional answer. You're actually able to communicate why you can or cannot do something. And to me, that's a beautiful thing. But again, the most important about a budget, it will help you set and track your goals, because that is why we budget. The whole plan of budgeting is so you can have your goals. So having success in your goals, even if they're small, even if one of your goals is work a budget for this month, you've successful. If one of your goals was coming to this budgeted class, you've done that, yay. So it is going to make you feel better after you get over the pain of it all, if you know what I'm saying. This class has been basically about an hour this morning. Thank you very much for attending. I would like to again talk about the other classes we have available that you can all find on Job Gateway, on the Job Gateway calendar. You can sign yourself up for them. Monday's Career Exploration. Tuesdays, Get That Job. Wednesday is Resume Writing. Thursday is Financial Literacy. Friday is Social Media. And next Friday, that's going to be the first day we start that. And then we always have the Customer Service Boot Camp. And that is 4 days in 1 week, Tuesday through Friday, 4 hours a day. And that is a Pennsylvania Department of Human Services accredited course. Upon completion, you will receive a customer service certification. All of those classes you can find on Job Gateway. If you're interested in learning more, you need some help, please feel free to talk to the career advisor, your employment consultant, or about other local resources. At this time, if you could finish the paperwork that the moderator gave you and pass them back to the moderator. Thank you much for spending your time with me this morning, and good luck budgeting.